Quick side note from Editor Matthew, there were some birds chirping in my background while I was filming, and they're still kind of chirping now, intermittently. So I apologize in advance for any audio disturbances. There's nothing going on in your background, just in mine. So now back to the video. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of JavaScript for Beginners. Now in this video, we are going to be talking about arrays. Up until now, we have been using variables that hold single values. For example, when we go let my name equal Matthew, that my name variable only holds Matthew, one value. But what if we wanted to have a variable that could hold a list of names, many different values? Like it could hold Matthew, James, Sarah, and Joe, like 4 different names in one variable. Well, we would be able to achieve that using arrays. Now, arrays are essentially ways of creating lists of values into one variable. So to go ahead and get started, let's open up our code folder, which is here for me. And then open up our JavaScript and HTML. Now, I'm going to go ahead and start by opening up our live server, which we don't usually do, just so I can start right away. So as you can see here in the console, this is the result of our previous lesson. Now I'm going to delete all of the code here, and I actually added a little extra comment here to remind myself the different topics to cover. So like I said, up until now when we wanted to create a variable, or a variable, we would say let my name equal Matthew, for example. And this one variable holds a single value. Now, you might think maybe we could go Matthew, comma, James, comma, Sarah, comma, Joe, but the code actually doesn't know that this variable is multiple things. All it can see is that it's a string of characters that happens to be Matthew, and then a comma and a space, and then James, a comma and a space. Like, it can't actually tell that these are 4 different items. Now, the way we can do that, I'm going to go ahead and revert this just to Matthew here. Or actually, no, I'm going to keep it like this to demonstrate something. We can go let list of names equals, and then to create an array in code, we actually use these things called square brackets, which you'll be able to find them right above the enter key. They'll be the second and third to last keys above the enter key. And this denotes an array. It tells the code, I want to make a list of different things into one variable. Now, to start off this array, we are just going to write in Matthew, like we did up here. And you'll notice if we actually got rid of all these 2 lines look fairly similar. The only difference being that we open up this array and close this array here using the square brackets. And that's how we start to create an array. Now, to add other items, we go comma, and then James, and then comma, and then Sarah, and then comma, and then Joe. And this is how we create an array. Now, the difference between these 2 can be seen when we print them. We go console.log my name, and then console.log list of names. And sorry, I have some birds chirping in the background. I'm not sure if you've been able to hear them so far, but just ignore that if you hear it. So go ahead and console.log these 2, and then if we reload here, you'll notice Matthew, James, Sarah, Joe. It prints here as just 4 items, like it appears here. But this array, when we try to print it, it prints this thing, and we can open it up, and then it says Matthew, James, Sarah, Joe, and they're all separate. And that's the code essentially recognizing that, hey, these 4 different values are not supposed to be combined like this. This thinks it's combined into one variable. Now, if you'll notice here, it says 0, 1, 2, 3, and I kind of mentioned this a couple videos ago, but code is generally 0-based, at least in most languages, meaning when you have a list of things or something like that, it'll start on the 0th index instead of the first index like most people would expect. So yeah, you just have to realize that. So the first item is at the 0 index, and then the second item is at the 1, the third is at the second index, and all that. So we have that, and then the length is 4, because we have 4 items in this array. Now, there's many different things that you can do with an array that, of course, you can't do with a single variable. For example, like you can see when you print it, the code can recognize the 4 different items and how they're different. Another thing you can do is you can actually add to arrays after the fact. For example, you see how there's 4 items here? Well, we can actually add another item in our code besides when we create it. We can go list of names dot push, and then we can add Christian, for example. And then if we reload here, you'll notice Christian gets added to the end. Now, this kind of syntax might make some intuitive sense, but I'm going to explain it in a little bit more detail. This period right here, it essentially means possession in code. Whatever is on the left possesses the right. Now, what this means is list of names is the name of our variable, which is an array. Now, when we go dot, we are essentially saying this array owns, or like this array's thing, and then we can go push. And push is a function, if you remember from the previous video. A function takes in, sometimes will take in things, it'll do something with that data, and then sometimes it'll give something back. In this case, it only takes in something, and then it does something with the data. For example, it takes in the string Christian, or whatever string really, or anything, and then what it does is it adds it to the array. That's what this function does. When you look at console, the log function belongs to the console, and the console is this place here where we can print stuff, and it takes in a variable, it takes in something, and then what it does with that is it prints it to the console. So that you've actually been using functions from the very first line of code that you wrote. You just didn't realize it. And they're everywhere, really, like this push function here. It adds to an array. Now you might be wondering, how do I remove from an array? Well, you can go list of names dot, and then in JavaScript we use a function called splice, most often at least. In different programming languages there are different ways, and even in JavaScript there are multiple different ways to actually remove from arrays, but this is the one we'll be using, dot splice, and then we actually start splice with the index of the item we want to remove. And when I say index, that's essentially the place in the array that the item is. For example, if we want to remove James, as you can see here, we can take a look on the left. Matthew is at the 0 index because it's the first item. James is at the 1 index because it's the second item. So let's say we wanted to remove James. We can remove the first index item, and then it says delete count is the second thing we pass. So we want to remove the first item and delete one item, which will delete James. Now, as you'll notice here, this function actually takes 2 variables and we separate them with a comma. And that's how it works in code as well. Just like how this array took 4 different items, we separated them with commas. So just one thing to note. And we reload this, and it's Matthew, Sarah, Joe, Christian. We got rid of James by using the splice function here. Now, that's all cool. Like, we can edit arrays, we can add things, we can remove things, we can create them. But what can we actually do? Like, can we actually access each element? And of course we can. So I'm going to remove these 2 prints, not to confuse you, and we are going to print something else. Say we wanted to print the first item in this array. We can print list of names, and then if you'll notice here, we use these square brackets to create the list, to create the array. Well, we actually use those as well to access certain elements, certain items in that array. So we open and close a square bracket, and we put the index. If you remember, the 0 index is the first item. So if I save this, it prints Matthew, which is the first item in the array. Now, that's pretty much how we access different elements of arrays. Now, if we wanted to loop over this array and print every element, then we can use a loop. Specifically, we can use a for loop, as you remember in the previous video, and this is actually going to be a little bit of review. Now, to begin a for loop, we type in for, and the reason why we use a for loop is because, if you'll remember, for loops are generally for when we know how many times we want to loop. And in this code, we do know how many times we want to loop. We want to loop for every item in this array. So for, like if there's 5 items, we want to loop 5 times. If there's 10 items, we want to loop 10 times. We know how much we want to loop. So we open the for, and then remember there's 2 semicolons. The first area is the initialization. The second area is the condition, and the third area is the update. Now, in our initialization, we want to say let, and then index. If you remember, the index is the position, equals 0, because we always start at 0. And then in here, we want to say index is less than, And if you remember, the dot means possession, so we can say list of names dot length, and that will be the actual, like, how many items are in our list. And then for update, we can go index equals index plus 1. And in code, there's actually a way to shorthand this. We can type index plus equals 1. And that means add 1 to index. That's all it means. It means the same as index equals index plus 1. It's just a little bit faster. So then we're going to go ahead and open up this for loop. And inside, we want to print. We want to go console.log. And then if you remember, list of names. And then to access a certain element, we type in these curly or these square brackets. And then we put in our index like that. And if you'll notice here on the right, it goes Matthew, Sarah, Joe, Christian, because we removed James and we added Christian. So this is every element individually printed. Before we were able to print the entire array, but now we can actually access every name. And you'll notice this can be very useful. Say we wanted to have some sort of program that emails every single guest to a party. Well, if we had an array of their emails and their names, then we could go through each single instance, every item in that array, every item in that list, and send out an email. And that's how they're used in the real world. That's how arrays are used when we write code. So I hope this video has been helpful. This has been arrays. I can't really think of many more examples. Like, yeah, maybe actually we will go through one more example. So like I said, when I was saying I'm going to go ahead and remove all of these. And we can go let email list. And then equal, and then we can even set it to an empty array, which is where we put nothing inside. And then we can just go email list dot push, and then example at example.com, and email list dot push again, example at example2.com, and then we can go like for, and I'm just writing this all out. Let I equals 0. And we remember earlier we said index, but really we can name this whatever, and this is just shorthand. This is very common. I is less than email list dot length, and then I plus equals 1, or encode another way, yet another shorthand. And actually, I would highly recommend going throughout this video again and remembering all of the shorthands that I teach, because this is actually what code looks like in the real world. We can go I++. And what that means is that'll also just increment the variable, meaning increment meaning add 1. So we want to open up our loop, console.log, email list, and then to access a certain element, we open this and then put I inside, and that prints the first email and prints the second email. So I hope this video was useful, teaching you what arrays are. And to recap, arrays are a way for us to store many values in one variable, unlike up until now where we've been storing one value into one variable. If you want to see more videos in this series, or if you happen to miss the previous videos, go ahead and check out the playlist linked in the description, where I'll be uploading new videos daily. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a thumbs up, subscribe and hit the bell icon for notifications whenever I post new videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.